You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. Doing the show slightly differently today. We're going to be in two different studios, mirroring each other because I couldn't get Ed over to the bar, mainly because I spent the entire weekend at a hockey tournament in Madison, Wisconsin, and watched Brother Rice's JV and varsity teams play. My kids on the JV team, but both teams were in the same hotel, traveling up from the south side, Ed, to go play in a hockey tournament. It was a fun weekend. It was an exhausting weekend. And I'm going to do this with you and pass out.
That sounds like a reasonable plan, to just go ahead and you know, fake it till you make it for about 30 minutes of White Sox baseball and then turn around and become comatose for the next 24 hours.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm going to end up doing here. 1, fun time. 2, they played great. 3, parents drink way too much. You immediately, like the teen parents, I mean, the amount of booze they went through with it.
You're also in Madison,
There's
Wisconsin.
Nothing to do.
And I'm not here to bag on Wisconsin, although I often do. But what else? Really, what else are you guys going to do when you're out there? It's not like the parents are going to be like, all right, 2 hockey teams from a high school. Stay here under your own supervision. We're going to go out and do something cultural and artistic. Oh, well, they kept trying to come up with like fun things to do, but everything just led back to the parents going, okay, where are we going to go get some drinking done? Like, I mean, that's just we all acted like we were like college kids or early 20s kids, right? Like, you know, when I was young. I can't do that anymore. I mean, seriously. Well, if it makes you feel any better, the Special Olympics regional basketball tournament I was at on Sunday morning, we did the exact same thing. I mean, it was
big drinking. Well, hold on a second. There was big drinking at the Special Olympics regional basketball?
Drinking, not so much, but maybe other things.
Okay. All right. We had fun weekends, that's for sure.
There we go.
The White Sox did some international signings, which I think is really nice. And they took care of their arbitration guys right before they would have had to start going to a hearing. They settled with everybody. That's all wonderful news.
That's a good thing.
I'm concerned about the idea, though, that you probably have about $2.5 million of international money left. And I don't know what you're saving it for. Like, on one hand, I'm happy that I see a bunch of names. We've talked about that on this show before. We've had guests on that have talked about it before, that the White Sox philosophy over the last couple of years of getting the big name guys like a Luis Robert means they have far less guys in their system than, say, the Padres, who go out and just spend a bunch of money, sign a bunch of small contracts in those international pools, and then have a lot of capital when they want to make a trade. So on one hand, I liked the idea of spreading it out. On the other hand, I would have liked to have seen another 5 names on there because you got $2.5 million that you didn't use.
Well, and to your point, are there not 3, 4, 5 other guys out there that are deserving of a dart throw? I mean,
anybody.
It's money that you're going to spend anyway, or that you would have spent. Can you just throw a dart, see if one of these guys turns into something? And that's what you're doing. And that's what, you know, signing multiple guys is all about. And, you know, obviously the big name that everyone's going to talk about is Juan Uribe Jr., who is literally from Chicago, but, you know, still, you've got some legacy there, but there's other things. You know, you can read up on you know, Denny Lima and Abraham Nunez and Albert Alberto, who's that's going to be a fun one to say. D'Angelo Tejada, Rafael Alvarez, and, you know, then you've got Luis Reyes, who's the number 41 prospect, who's actually the big one that they signed. So, because that's one of the top 50. So you've got, you know, you're signing talent, you're signing a bunch of players, and yeah, do you really need to leave the $2.5 million? Is there somebody else that they're waiting for? Is there a group of guys that, you know, they're not going to put money towards, or is the pool that shallow this year? And I can't believe it's the last one. I can't believe that it's just there's not enough players out there that are worth throwing into the system to see if they develop.
Listen, 16 and 17-year-old kids that you select in this international signing period, right? They turn into 19-year-old prospects that you throw into trades. I mean, that's what they are. Most of them never even make it. to the point where you're even considering that they could be Major League Baseball players when you're signing them at that lower level talent and those really young kids. You're just grabbing capital, right? You're just getting pieces that you may be able to turn around and flip when you need to make a deal at some point because somebody else scouted the kid and was like, you know what, we think that kid's pretty good. And it doesn't matter what they are now, it matters what they are in a couple of years when they're still way too young to make it to the majors, but there's something that you can move. And that's the only thing that whenever you hear criticism about how they handle international signings, it's that they don't add to that pool of just really young kids that a couple of years later, after they've been in their system or they've been under their watchful eye, now becomes a prospect that gets added into a deal where you're dealing 3 guys off for 1, right? Because some team is like, yeah, throw in that kid too. We like what we've seen out of him over the last couple of years since you signed him with that international money. So that's the only reason why I kind of sit back and go, wow, it just feels like a missed opportunity, a waste of resources. I don't know how exactly to do it, how exactly to say it, except if there is something down the pipe, if they have a feeling that somebody's going to become available that they're still going to be able to go and get, and that's why they're holding on to that money, or they're going to use that money. But to me, it just seems like just sign a bunch of guys at this point, right? If there wasn't a big name and you don't have a big name that you know you're holding that for, just fill up your system with all those really young players that can later be flipped.
Yeah, if there's no projectable superstar, if there's no one that is the Luis Robert who you're sitting there going, this guy has the opportunity to be an absolute game changer, a dynamic player, then you're just looking for Kenny Williams' favorite thing. You're looking for athletes. You're looking for projectable physical skill. That's something, I mean, honestly, that's got to be like what Kenny Williams does when he's feeling lonely at night, is he just goes and he looks for projectable athletic skill.
He's just scrolling through a list somewhere, trying to figure out, like, are they the right body type? Ooh. And do they have, like, this really great athleticism?
This guy's got strong wrists.
This guy's never used a baseball in his life. He plays a completely different sport, but we think we can make him into a second baseman.
But look at the calves. Look at how fast he can sprint and accelerate.
This episode of Sox in the Basement and every episode of Sox in the Basement brought to you by our proud sponsors, the home of the podcast for fans, by fans, Cork and Kerry at the Park. They're over at 33rd and Princeton, in the shadow of the ballpark. They have an award-winning menu of burgers and ballpark favorites, 2-for-1 burgers when you dine in on Monday's non-Sox home games, extensive bar with a rotation of craft beers, familiar favorites, spirits, and wines. They are your home base for White Sox pre, post, and viewing parties. So just make sure you make plans when you're getting down there this summer, because I'm telling you, this is where I bring the whole family before I even walk into the ballpark. And I'm able to get them some food, I'm able to have a beer, I'm able to get into the atmosphere of the whole thing, and then I mosey my way over to the ballpark and continue to look for the pretzel brat, which I'm never going to find, right? I'm just going to get burgers at Cork and Kerry at the Park. That's what I'm going to do.
And that's a better trade, because what I've heard from people who got the pretzel wrap brat, it's all right. Yeah, it's nothing special for what you spent. I'd rather go get frankly a plate of wings and a burger from Cork and Kerry at the Park than search around for this elusive brat.
I don't even think it exists. I think somehow it's a trick that's being played on me. And at this point, I'm no longer interested in it. Anyway, you know.
I think if you get one, you actually have to put like a plate of like helmet nachos on the thing where the pretzel brat is to try and balance out the weight. And if you don't get it right, a large boulder comes down and chases you out into left field. I don't think the fundamentals deck exists. I think it's just a transport ramp for a large boulder if you do find the pretzel brat.
That makes sense. There's a list out of that includes some White Sox players, and I love whenever prospect list comes out. And this one's an interesting one because it's a fantasy baseball prospect list. And the reason that I find these interesting, and I always say this on the show, one, I like fantasy baseball. I know we're getting ready to have our winter meetings in our Dynasty League where there's going to be trades everywhere, and we're getting ready. We're gearing up for our season. It's almost like a year-round thing. I mean, there were deals being made last month in this league, right? But so I love trolling for the prospects so that I can add them to my team, and years later, all of a sudden, I have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. as my first baseman. This is the kind of thing I get into. But this list is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One, the list on CBSSports.com right now it basically says right there on the top of it, take out defense. The only way defense becomes a factor here in this list, because we're talking fantasy, is if it's going to keep the guy off the field from regular playing time, or he's got a hole in his glove, and that's why we think he'll never get promoted. Otherwise, these are the guys that are on the list solely for their bat and for what they can do offensively. And there's 2 White Sox players on there. And the other interesting thing about it, before I get to the 2 names on the list and where they rank in this top 100 list, is that the list is taking into an account that the player should get here relatively soon. Like, if not showing up at some point at the end of this season, let's say, getting a cup of coffee, definitely in the mix to make it to the majors next year. So the first name I want to point out is at number 40, and this is the lower of the 2 White Sox players. The number 40 player is Oscar Colas, and that makes sense to me because when it comes to Oscar Colas, we're expecting him to be playing right field. I know that's what I'm thinking. I'm figuring he's the right fielder. Is that your assumption as well?
That's my assumption. My assumption is, well, you know, what they say on the list here is he's fighting for a job this spring. So my assumption is if he shows up, shows off his talent, does well in spring training, doesn't show any obvious flaws. Like if he goes up there and strikes out every at bat, okay, and goes like 0 for the entire spring, there's no way they're promoting him. It's just not going to happen. But if he goes and he hits like the rest of the regulars are hitting, and showcases what he can do, especially if he actually hits some home runs and stuff like that and shows the power, which is what we're expecting from him, then yeah, I absolutely expect him to break camp, be the starting right fielder, and make it so that, you know, when we're talking about 4th outfielders, we're talking about Gavin Sheets, we're talking about, you know, somebody who is a Billy Hamilton or a lesser minor leaguer that we're not expecting necessarily to see break camp, and have that starting outfield of Benintendi, Robert, Colas, and really, you know, that he is going to be an everyday contributor. How much, I don't know that I want to project him to sit there and say that coming off of a minor league year where under 481 at-bats, he hit .314 with 23 homers and .895 OPS, walked 38 times, struck out 120 times. I think the strikeouts will be higher. I think the walks will be a little bit lower. I think the OPS will be a little bit lower because that's what happens to rookies. But I think he's got that talent that this is what we're excited about. This is why somebody like Oscar Colas gets the big contract, you know, and gets the opportunity to come here and they spend the money on him because we
in the international market. You're talking international money. His deal was big for international. That's
big
for
for international. That's what I meant. Big for international money. Obviously not the richest contract in White Sox history, which goes to Andrew Benintendi and possibly most of the ushers at this point because of the amount of money not thrown around by the Sox over the last 40 years.
Listen, the thing I find the most interesting, though, is that they're trying to evaluate, is he going to make an impact this year? Like, should you put this guy on your fantasy team because he's going to put up good offensive numbers? And I like the point that they make that he always hit over 300. Like at all of his stops, at all 3 stops in the minor leagues, hitting over 300 at every spot. Plus, showing a lot of power with 16 home runs in his final 54 games. And they say that leaves little doubt he's ready for the next challenge. They're basically telling you, if you're looking to put this guy into your fantasy team, he's going to score you points because he's going to have good offensive output. So their assumption, at least evaluating him for this purpose, is that he is going to translate to the majors. I mean, I think you're right about the strikeouts. I think he's going to be higher on strikeouts. And a guy who only had 38 walks compared to 120 strikeouts, that gap probably widens even more. So that may get a little frustrating. But if you can get a guy, I mean, let's say he hit over 290 at every stop, right? What if he comes out there and hits 280 for you in his rookie year, or 270 for you in his rookie year in Major League Baseball?
20 home runs.
20 home runs and plays right field and supposedly is a good defender out there. You're going to take that from a rookie.
I'm good.
Yeah, and you're not really relying on him to be up at the top of your order, are you?
No.
This guy's at the bottom of your order. This guy's towards the bottom. He's in one of the final 3 spots in the lineup when he comes up.
And that's where Andrew Benintendi becomes important, because when we were talking about Oscar Colas at the beginning of the offseason being one of their outfielders, and we're looking at the other outfielder being Gavin Sheets, and we're looking at, you know, whoever is internal that they could put out there, you look at it and you go, okay, Colas has to hit 270 to 280. He has to hit 20-plus home runs. He has to, you know, keep the strikeouts in check. He's got to get on base because he's got to be one of your top 5 hitters. Now he doesn't have to be. You know, now you can bat him 7th and let him grow. Let him do it, and have the best 7th or 8th hitter in the league, for that matter, or one of the more dangerous ones anyway, if not the best. But I think it's important you see him on this list and sit there and say, yes, he's got a chance to make an immediate impact, and that would be huge for the Sox.
Before we get to the other name on the list and what they said, I just want to remind all of you out there, if you got mom or dad, grandma or grandpa switching to a new age of life, you're trying to keep them out of assisted living, or let's say you spent an entire weekend drinking like you were 25 and you're 45 like me, and everything hurts. Maybe you need the house set up a little bit so you don't fall down. Because I almost did it 3 times just coming down here to the bar today. That's how tired I am. But if you're in need of medical equipment, in all seriousness, Hyatt Home Medical Equipment down in Evergreen Park has a big, beautiful showroom. They have everything from the latest in CPAP technology for those with sleep apnea to diabetes control. They have lifts that get you from one floor to another floor. They can set up the house like a smart home. With the touch of a button on an app, you can open and close and lock doors. You can basically set the house up to be so safe you'll never consider leaving the house. A lot of people want to stay in their home as they get into an advanced age, or if they've had like a procedure, a surgery, something like that, and it's a little bit tougher to get around, Hyatt can help you out. See all that they can do at hhme.com. Mention Sox in the Basement, get additional money off, and they'll work with your insurance. Or stop in today and see them. Ask any question you want at 3518 West 95th Street in Evergreen Park. The number 35 player on this list, who's sitting 5 spots in front of Oscar Colas, is Colson Montgomery. Now, I want to read what they said about him, and then I want to go back to the point that I made right at the very beginning of this when we looked at this list, that I want to remind you of something here. Here's what they said about him first. They show that he's 21 on opening day this year. His highest level is AA. They put out his minor league stats, and they read it like this. Though Montgomery was selected 18 picks after Marcelo Mayer in 2021, the Corey Seager comp could apply just as easily to him, seeing as he bats left-handed, stands an imposing 6'4", and has a swing geared for line drives. The move up to AA late in the year tripped him up a little, but his first full season went so well overall that he's verging on elite prospect status. And they said maybe he gets a late season look. I don't know if that's really something that's realistic, but this guy's moving along in the system. And for them to put him on the list, again, this is in the prism of when he comes up, he's going to get regular playing time because they otherwise he wouldn't be very useful on this prospect list. And he's coming, if not this year, next year, because that's kind of how far out they're looking when they describe why they're doing these rankings in this order. He's higher up on this list than he is on the MLB pipeline list that's currently out. I think that's going to change. He's going to be way up on that list. I think he was in the 50s at the end of the season, and he may be a 30 or even higher up than 35, like on this fantasy baseball list. But this is the prospect right now in the system that is starting to get all the national attention when people put out lists like this.
Yeah, and for comparison, what they're saying about Marcelo Mayer of the Red Sox is a guy that's only in low A, high A last year. Stats are comparable to Colson Montgomery's, but they say considered by many to be the top talent in the 2021 draft. Meyer's polish is evident, and he should have a relatively easy and straightforward climb to the majors. Corey Seager remains the go-to comp, with an expectation Meyer will hit for both average and power from the left side of the plate, and possibly turn out to be more of a base stealer than expected. So sit there and say samesies for Colson Montgomery, and consider that he's a year sooner into the majors because he has progressed a little bit faster.
Yeah, he's in Double A.
Yeah, because of the Birmingham experiment last year. That was one of the things that they did.
Right. He never. Yeah, well, that was the reason. That's why he was up. They kind of failed to mention that. That's why he was up with this whole Project Birmingham thing. But I think that was probably good for him. That seemed like that idea to get them all together underneath the same tutelage. I thought that was pretty smart what they ended up doing. I thought that was you always look for your team to start thinking outside the box or doing something different. And I always find that to be a positive if it works or doesn't work, because you're just not doing the same old thing. But he did get a taste of Double A last year, and the belief is that he's going to continue to move quickly through this system, which is interesting because I don't know, what does he become? Do you think that he starts off moving into the third base position if they're having a problem getting Yoan Moncada going? Does he go and stand at second base next year and then eventually transition over to short if and when TA moves on? Once his option years are out, because I would imagine he's going to go out and try to get paid. And I don't know, the White Sox their biggest contract is 5 years and $75 million. I don't know if TA is going to want that, right? So, I mean, what do you think the plan is for him? Because he may not start at short, but I think he'll eventually be at short.
Well, and that's maybe the situation is that he is the bat behind the glass that you need to break in case you don't have a second baseman that seems to be a fixture going forward, or that you do have more of an issue with Yoan Moncada, and you can't sit there and say we're going to be able to count on this guy to do anything for us more than just play decent defense. Or maybe he really is just the heir apparent to TA. But I really honestly think that the White Sox would make a concerted effort to try and sign Tim Anderson. I just don't know, like you said, how much he's going to be looking at the $200 million contracts that have been handed out and the $75 million that's been handed out to Andrew Benintendi as the high watermark for the White Sox, and think that there's going to be a gap closure there, enough of it for Anderson. And also I think it's fair to say that Anderson being in his 30s is going to be a different conversation than maybe you would have had with a 28-year-old Andrew Benintendi, or even if Anderson was younger. But I think Montgomery, what I would expect is that they're going to try and give him some positional versatility so that when they figure out where he is most comfortable and best at, they will build around him in that spot. So if it turns out that he is a lights-out third baseman, Yoan Moncada will be out of here as soon as his contract is up, because Colson Montgomery, that's his spot. If he is really a top-end shortstop, then that's going to impact the Tim Anderson signing and re-signing an extension. And if it's something where Montgomery is just, this is the second baseman of the future, because second base isn't a throwaway position necessarily, and it's one of those.
Not anymore. Not after the shift. Not after the shift rules too. You're going to have a better athlete at second base.
And also, if you are a team that has a good second baseman, you get good production out of second base. That is a huge win. It should not be treated as an afterthought position just because the White Sox haven't been able to find one consistently since Tadahito Iguchi almost 20 years ago.
Doesn't he, though, seem like the prospect that they won't move?
Montgomery?
Right? I mean, like, whenever you see like rumors or what people are asking for or things like that, don't you just imagine that he's probably that guy that when a team asks about him, they're like, yeah, pick off this list. Like, we have plans for this guy. You know, I mean, I'm not going to go out and say he's untouchable, but I would imagine that they, as an organization, knowing that they really haven't, I mean, up until last year, when he moved onto the top 100 MLB prospect list, there had been a dry spell. A lot of that was because guys got promoted. Like, they used to have a ton of them when they were in the remix, as you call it, not the rebuild. Okay, but they had been cleared off of that list. He's a really valuable piece, but he's also a piece that they could look at three different positions, like you just said. They still haven't figured out second base. You don't know what Tim Anderson's going to be. You know, is he still going to be around in a couple years when he gets the opportunity to go into free agency? So, and since he's a shortstop, he can move to either one of those positions, and he could also move over to third base, where, again, in a couple of years, if this hasn't worked out, you spent a ridiculous amount of money in the last 2 years of Yoan Moncada's deal, but then at some point you're going to sit there and say, that's it, right? He never did anything besides what he did in 2019. And so then all of a sudden you're looking at this guy going, is he the third baseman? So he really has the ability to go anywhere. And that's probably why they sit there and say that it's hard to find that guy. And there's so many questions at those three positions. You probably want to hold that prospect if you really believe in him.
Well, and also you do when you draft and when you sign international free agent stars, you know, the potential superstars, and you spend big on them with that international money, of course. But when you're doing this and you're identifying top-end guys, what Rick Hahn was doing, and again, I disagree with this philosophy as a true rebuild in the way it was sold to us, but it's not a terrible philosophy if you hit on every single one of them. When you identify certain guys, Colson Montgomery falls into that list of guys that you're going to try and build the team around, okay? Just like Luis Robert, just like Eloy Jimenez, just like Andrew Vaughn, and a lot like what Tim Anderson was coming out of the rebuild, or Jose Abreu was coming, into the rebuild, I should say, coming out of where their last supposed contention window when they sold off Chris Sale and Adam Eaton and everything. So you identify guys that you're going to build around, and Colson Montgomery seems to be that guy. So no, you're not going to move him unless it is one of those things where it's like, my God, look what we're getting back, right? If you're getting back a generational talent that you can control for a while, like a Juan Soto kind of a guy. Not saying that that's what it would take, but if you're getting back something that is just an immediate, high impact, gonna be around here, takes this team to that level, and it costs you Colson Montgomery, I think the team would consider it. But I also don't know that Montgomery is high enough on the list of prospects that other teams are looking at it that way, which doesn't make him not valuable, because if the White Sox had Corey Seager in his prime right now, sitting at second base or sitting at third base instead of Yohan Moncada, wouldn't they be a better team?
Yes, they would be. Yes, they would be. And so, he's the guy I'm paying attention to a lot when I'm not watching the Major League product this year. Hailstorm Brewing Company is the official brewery of Sox in the Basement. They're in Tinley Park at 8060 186th Street, right off of 80th Avenue. And they got Will Turner there. He's a year into it now. He's doing a great job with all their brewing. They've got some really big-time beers there. They've got stouts and porters, and they've got IPAs that have won awards. It's the place to go sit down, watch guys like making beer, like if you're into that kind of thing, and I always think that's really cool. They'll chat with you from time to time. It's a full working brewery with a beer hall type feel, and then it's got the tap room right there, and everything's got this big open floor plan so you can see everything. They got music on the weekends and trivia nights in the weekdays, and definitely go check them out. See the entire list of everything they have to offer at hailstormbrewing.com. And remember, when you're over at Cork and Carry at the park, they're on tap over there as well. So Hailstorm Brewing, the official brewery of Sox in the Basement. Listen, the arbitration things where they came to their quick agreement so they didn't have to go to a hearing with Giolito, Reynaldo Lopez, Dylan Cease, Kopech, and Jose Ruiz. That's all good stuff. When I was looking at the list, it's interesting when you go on Fangraphs, it'll tell you, all right, and then remember Giolito and Lopez become free agents next year. The other three guys still are in arbitration. They're just going into their second year of arbitration. And watch out for two new guys that would be arbitration eligible next year, in Garrett Crochet and Andrew Vaughn. So it's interesting when you see that timeline sitting right out in front of you. But then the other thing that I really just can't get my mind wrapped around, I will never understand the arbitration process, because I know it was year one for Dylan Cease, and it's year 3 for Lucas Giolito. So, of course, Giolito later on is probably going to make more money at $10.4 million, but he's going to make $10.4 this year, and the best pitcher on the staff by far, Dylan Cease, is making $5.7. And it just boggles the mind where those two guys end up in the arbitration process.
Well, it's because it never goes backwards. Once you've established a certain value in this process, you can't take it away from them. So...
wouldn't it be great if you could?
But that would be, well, first of all, if I'm the MLB Players Association, and I would never allow that to be negotiated into any contract. That would be the dumbest thing I could do, is let the arbitration system allow a backslide, okay? Because you would have so many guys just fall off the ledge that way, because they get in their first year of arbitration that after having a good solid year or two, and they win. If they win a hearing or they get a nice contract offer from the team that's market value and projectable, they turn into Yohan Moncada and fall apart. And what are you going to do, right? But it is one of those inequities that I think drives not only fans a little batty, because you sit there and go, how on earth? But it also, I think, drives teams a little bit nuts. And I think it actually drives the players themselves a little bit nuts, too, because you knew that Dylan Cease was not going to make a jump to the $10 million mark in his first year of arbitration, even with the amazing
he would be worth
season.
it. He'd be worth it, but they're not going to give that to him. That's the thing. That's not how it works, right?
So you're not going to have that kind of a jump. The fact that he's basically just under $6 million, now project that out to when he is in his last year of arbitration, like Lucas Giolito, and figure out how expensive Dylan Cease is going to be then.
He'll be expensive. But you know what? When I'm comparing them, you more want to look at where Cease and Kopech came in this year, right? Because Cease is 5.7 and Kopech's 3.7 million lower than him. And I hope I get a motivated Michael Kopech this year, who looks at that and goes, wait a minute. So if I can pitch at that same level because I think I'm good enough to be just like what Dylan Cease is, I can make that. I can jump up that high or even higher in year 2. Like that's because there's two guys in their first year of arbitration. That's a pretty substantial thing. Cease more than double Kopech. But I guess that's how you compare it then, right? Because then you look at it and you sit there and go, okay, well, Kopech is worth $2 million. A guy like Cease has to be worth a lot more after you see what his season was.
Yeah, well, and, frankly, as a fan, I also look at that, and I look at those numbers, and Kopech is expected to not be behind Dylan Cease necessarily in the grand scheme of things.
It was never what you thought, right? During the prospect part.
The Chris Sale trade was supposed to bring, the ultimate superstars, right?
Right. I mean, that was the thing. Kopech was supposed to be the bigger deal than Dylan Cease. And now as we hit year one, it is really interesting to see how the actual value of those guys as they get to year one of their arbitration.
Yeah, and I'm sure, look, Kopech's injury has a lot to do with it because he lost time. And, his usage is different than Dylan Cease's usage. But still, I would have anticipated, if you would have told me when this all started, when Dylan Cease is acquired, when Michael Kopech's acquired, that going into the 2023 season, they'd both be in the rotation, I would have said, yeah, it's exactly what's supposed to be happening. If you would have said they're your number 2 and 3 starter, potentially, in terms of how the season's going to line up, because I still think that there's a chance that Lance Lynn could open the season just out of veteran status, or Lucas Giolito could. But, if you said they're top of the rotation guys, I would have said absolutely. I fully expect that. If you would have said that Dylan Cease was a Cy Young runner-up and Michael Kopech barely finished the season on his feet, I would have wondered what was going on there, because I would have expected the opposite to be true, where I would expect Dylan Cease to still be learning at this point somewhat, and Kopech was supposed to be the guy that comes out blazing and is Justin Verlander at this point.
Is Michael Kopech the most interesting name in the rotation this year as a fan? I mean, yeah, you're looking at Clevenger going, okay, let's see with this deal that he has. He knows that he's got to go out and have a big year. Do we get something similar to like Johnny Cueto? We get a guy who comes in and he's really good, right? We get really good Mike Clevenger. Do we see Lucas Giolito make a bounce back? Which I've said, I really think that that's a possibility, because he's going out in the free agency next year, and this is his biggest season ever, and how he performs with the White Sox, right? And we're watching the veteran Lance Lynn, but we kind of know what he is, and we just want to make sure that he continues to bring what he's supposed to bring to you. And you know who Dylan Cease is already, and the only thing that could happen is if something goes terribly wrong. Otherwise, you just basically expect him to be a stud again on the mound. So isn't Kopech the one that you're looking at this point in his career, and you're saying, all right, let's see. I mean, is he really going to be that guy that he was touted to be or not? I would think this is that crossroads season for him.
It has to be. Well, and here's the thing. We may have seen, I don't want to say we've seen the best of Lucas Giolito, but I think we've seen what he's capable of. And for him to have better numbers than his best year is, I don't know that it's going to be another level that he jumps to necessarily. I think Dylan Cease could make a jump up, but I think we already know where he could go. I think Lance Lynn is Lance Lynn at this point. I think Mike Clevenger's interesting because of not knowing what you're getting necessarily fully. If you're getting pre-injury Mike Clevenger, or if you're getting some diminished version of him. But also, Clevenger, I don't think, has another gear. I don't think he's rising up from this injury to turn into something more amazing than we've ever seen Mike Clevenger be. I think we're looking for him to be what he was, which is probably a number 3 cast as a number 1 on a questionable Cleveland team.
Well, I mean, and think about it this way. You're going to have the club option for Lynn in 24, and you're going to have Giolito and Clevenger. They're both going to be free agents again, right? So your whole staff, like the guys that you know are going to be around in 24 for sure, are Cease and Kopech. And you would assume Lynn, if Lynn pitches well. And you're like, yeah, we're paying that $18 million and we're bringing him back. So that's why I think he's one of those guys. Like, if you're a fan in the short term and the long term, because if he takes off this year, that's just going to make this really good staff look an awful lot better. And that's big for the White Sox chances in this upcoming season. But then also when you look at the long term, this is it. This is the crossroads right here.
Well, and if he does not emerge as an ace, that's not necessarily the end of Michael Kopech. But if he doesn't emerge as a reliable 2 or 3, meaning that he can stay on the mound, he can give you a decent amount of innings, and also he is capable of dominating some of his starts. If you get those quality starts out of him, then Michael Kopech becomes an extremely important fixture in the rotation. If he comes out and throws 120 innings and spends time on the shelf again and struggles in some of his starts and only can go 4 or 5, then he's not a guy you can build around or count on. And the White Sox, to your point, may have to think about extending Lynn even if they're not really happy with him, because it's too hard to go out and fill 4 starters in your rotation, and the 4 being, the 3 guys who leave, and Lynn, Giolito, and Clevenger potentially if those guys all leave, but also trying to find somebody to upgrade over Michael Kopech, because you can't count on him to be anything more than a back-end starter because he's just not showing up. He's just not there.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.